The first thing everyone heard was the impact. Not the dog's bark. Not the shout from the trainer. Not the clatter of boots across the wet concrete. It was the heavy, ugly sound of a grown man hitting the ground so hard that the radio clipped to his vest broke loose, skidded through a puddle, and sparked once before dying beneath the rain. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the K-9 yard at Naval Base Coronado erupted. Red warning lights began to flash along the perimeter fence. A siren gave one short, panicked burst before someone in the observation booth killed it. 2 security officers moved in from the east gate with their hands hovering near their holsters, not drawing. Not yet, but close enough that every handler in the yard noticed. Nobody wanted to shoot a military working dog. Nobody wanted to be the next person he put on the ground, either. The German Shepherd stood alone in the center of the yard, rain pouring over his black and tan coat, his head low, his shoulders shaking with a violence that did not look like rage. His lips were pulled back just enough to show the white points of his teeth. His ears flicked at every sound. His eyes moved too quickly, catching the floodlights, the hands, the boots, the open gate, the corner of the kennel block, the sky above the fence. His name was Rook. At least, that had been his name when the Navy still believed he could be handled. In the last 34 days, most people had stopped using it. They called him unstable. They called him combat damaged. They called him a liability. A few of the younger sailors, the ones who thought whispers could not travel through concrete and rain, called him Ghost Dog. 6 failed evaluations. 3 reassigned handlers. 2 bite warnings that had not quite become formal reports. 1 kennel door bent almost off its hinges during a thunderstorm at exactly 2:13 in the morning. That time mattered. Nobody understood why yet. Chief Handler Raymond Pike stood near the observation room steps with rain running down the back of his neck and a bitterness in his mouth that had nothing to do with the burned coffee he had been drinking 10 minutes earlier. He had spent 22 years with working dogs. He had seen aggression, fear, stubbornness, confusion, dominance, pain, and the miserable kind of loneliness that came after a handler rotated out and a dog did not understand why. This was different. Rook was not looking for someone to attack. He was looking for something that was not there. Sedation team is on the way, Pike shouted, trying to keep his voice calm enough for the dog and loud enough for the men behind him. Nobody rushes him. Nobody corners him. Rook heard movement near the gate and turned his head sharply. A growl came out of him. Every man in the yard stiffened. It was not the hot, sharp sound of anger. Anger had direction. Anger pointed at a target. This sound came from someplace buried deeper, someplace older than training. It was fear with teeth. It was a memory that still had claws. Back up, Pike ordered. The closest officer took a careful step away. Rain hammered the chain-link fence. Water streamed along the painted lines of the training yard. Somewhere beyond the base, the Pacific pushed against the dark coast, invisible but restless. Then a whistle cut through the storm. One note. Short. Low. Familiar. Rook froze. The growl died in his throat so suddenly that the entire yard seemed to stop with him. His ears lifted. His breathing changed. Slowly, very slowly, the shepherd turned toward the far fence. A man stood beyond it. No uniform. No umbrella. No visible badge. Just a tall, broad-shouldered man in an old canvas jacket, soaked to the skin, watching the dog as if the base, the lights, the armed officers, the rain, and the years between them had all disappeared. For a moment, he looked like a ghost who had wandered onto a military installation by mistake. "Who the hell is that?" one of the officers muttered. The man did not answer. He stepped closer to the gate. The floodlight swung across his face. Pike saw the scar that ran along the line of his jaw. He saw the gray at his temples. He saw the way the man carried himself, not like a civilian and not quite like active duty. There was a stillness to him, a practiced economy of movement. The kind of man learned when sudden motions got people killed. Then Pike saw the tattoo on his forearm, half hidden beneath the wet sleeve of the jacket. A German shepherd's profile beside a weathered naval special warfare trident. Rook took one step toward him, then another. The wildness left the dog in pieces. His tail stayed low. His body still trembled. Rain kept falling from his muzzle in silver threads. But his eyes changed. They were no longer scanning for a threat. They had found a memory. The stranger lifted one hand, palm open. "Rook," he said. The dog shivered, as if the name had reached a place no command had touched. Pike moved toward the gate, keeping his body turned slightly away from the shepherd. "Sir, step back. This dog is not safe." The stranger did not look away from Rook. "He is not unsafe. He put a trainer on the ground less than 3 minutes ago." "No," the man said quietly. He panicked. Rook made a sound then. It was not a bark. It was not a growl. It was a broken, breathless whine that passed through the yard and softened every face that heard it. Pike stared at the man through the rain. "How do you know this dog?" The stranger's throat moved before he answered. His eyes stayed on Rook, but something in his face collapsed inward, just for a second. "Because he saved my life in Syria." Nobody spoke. The rain filled the silence. The stranger nodded once toward the gate. "Open it." "That is not happening," Pike said. Rook took another step forward. He did not look at Pike. He did not look at the officers. He watched only the man outside the fence. The stranger gave the whistle again, softer this time, almost hidden beneath the weather. Rook lowered himself onto the soaked concrete in a perfect tactical down. No leash. No muzzle. No repeated command. One old sound from one old war. For several seconds, Pike could only stare. Then he walked to the gate and unlocked it. The man stepped into the yard as though he were entering a room full of glass. Careful. Calm. Every movement visible. Every breath measured. Rook's eyes followed him inch by inch. "Easy, boy," the man whispered. Pike kept a safe distance. "Name?" "Caleb Mercer." The name moved through the older personnel like a draft through an open door. One of the younger sailors near the observation booth whispered. "The SEAL who went missing?" Caleb ignored him. He stopped several feet from Rook, lowered himself into a crouch, and set both hands where the dog could see them. "Still hearing helicopters when the thunder rolls in?" he asked. Rook blinked. His ears twitched toward the black sky beyond the lights. Caleb gave a sad half-smile. "Yeah, me too." Pike's eyes narrowed. "We were told Rook's handler was killed during Operation Lantern Echo." Caleb looked down. For a moment, he seemed older than the base itself. "His handler was killed," he said. "I was the man trapped under the roof when Rook refused to leave." The words changed the air. A medic near the gate lowered his tablet. The officer with his hand near his holster let it fall to his side. Pike took a step closer. "Records list you as missing in action. Records say a lot of things when nobody wants to admit a mission went wrong." Rook rose slowly and walked toward Caleb. Every handler in the yard tightened. Caleb did not move. The shepherd stopped inches from him. Rain ran down his muzzle. Old scars showed through the wet fur along one shoulder. He smelled the man's jacket, his hands, the air around him, searching through layers of time. Then Caleb reached out and touched the side of his neck. Rook closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, the shaking stopped. Inside the observation room, Dr. Lena Morales watched through the rain-streaked glass with her arms folded tight against her chest. She had evaluated Rook for 3 weeks. She had read every incident report. She had watched him pace the kennel until his paws bled. She had seen him refuse food during storms, turn his mat toward the door every night, and wake from sleep with his teeth already bared at an enemy nobody else could see. She had called it trauma. Everyone else had called it failure. Now Caleb Mercer sat on the wet ground beside the dog, one hand buried in Rook's fur, and Lena understood with a clarity that hurt. The animal had not been waiting for a better command. He had been waiting for the only human who understood the war he was still living in. By midnight, the storm had worsened. Most of the handlers were inside, but almost nobody on base was sleeping. Word traveled fast in places where secrecy was supposed to be a discipline. A former SEAL still listed in some systems as missing had walked through the rain onto Coronado and calmed the most dangerous dog in the unit with a whistle. In the observation room, Pike stood with a fresh cup of terrible coffee and watched Caleb and Rook through the glass. Caleb sat on the floor of the covered training bay, back against the wall, legs stretched out, jacket draped over his knees. Rook lay beside him with his body pressed against Caleb's boot. Not asleep exactly. Not awake either. Suspended somewhere between exhaustion and vigilance. "You believe him?" Lena asked. Pike did not answer right away. He knew lies. He had heard them from recruits, officers, contractors, politicians, and men who wanted a dog to be something it was not. Caleb Mercer could have been lying about paperwork, missions, and what had happened overseas. But Rook believed him. And in Pike's world, that meant something. Rook believes him. Pike said at last. That is what worries me. Lena leaned over the table, where Rook's file lay open beneath a desk lamp. The episodes during storms always cluster around the same time. 213. The kennel incident, the first bite warning, the refusal to respond during evaluation 4. All within 10 minutes of it. Pike nodded slowly. Mercer knew the time before anyone told him. He also knew the trigger pattern. Thunder. Rotor noise. Confined space. Separation. Lena touched the edge of one report. And being forced. Outside, distant rotor blades thudded somewhere over the coast. A routine flight, probably, invisible behind cloud cover. Rook heard it. His head snapped up. His breathing changed so fast that Lena saw it from the observation room. His body folded low. His paws scraped against the floor. He was no longer in the training bay. His eyes had gone flat and far away. Here we go, Pike said, reaching for his radio. Caleb lifted one hand without turning around. Do not move, he called. Pike stopped. Rook's eyes were fixed on the ceiling, but he was not seeing it. Panic crawled through his body like fire beneath the skin. His mouth opened. His breath came too quickly. Caleb slowly removed his canvas jacket and laid it on the ground between them. The smell reached Rook first. Rain, cedar soap, old leather, gun oil, and the one human scent tied to the darkest night of his life. Caleb lowered himself beside the jacket, not blocking the dog, not trapping him. You are not back there, he said softly. You are at Coronado. It is raining. I am right here. Nobody is leaving you behind again. Rook stared at him. The helicopter faded into the storm. Seconds passed. Then, trembling so slightly that only Caleb could have noticed, Rook walked forward and lay down across the jacket. Pike lowered the radio. Lena wiped one hand across her face and pretended it was only rain on the window. At 0610 the next morning, Commander Ellis Grant arrived with 2 security officers and a folder that looked as though it had been opened for the first time in years. He brought the kind of silence that outranked conversation. Caleb stood in the behavioral unit wearing dry clothes someone had found in storage. They did not fit quite right. The sleeves were too short. The shoulders pulled tight. Rook rested at his boots, head on his paws, eyes open. The dog had slept through the night without tearing the kennel mat, biting the door, pacing, or drawing blood from his gums against the bars. That fact alone had spread through the unit like a miracle people were afraid to name. Grant set the folder on the table. You understand why this is a problem. Caleb did not look away from him. The problem is not me. You are an unauthorized civilian who entered a secure installation during an active animal control incident. I am a retired Navy chief who was written off because bringing me home made people uncomfortable. Pike's eyes flicked toward Grant. The commander did not deny it. Lena opened Rook's file because it gave her something to do with her hands. Rook's evaluations show classic post-traumatic stress responses. Sound triggers, separation panic, sleep disruption, hypervigilance, defensive aggression under forced handling. Grant looked at the dog. Can he work? The question landed hard. Caleb's hand tightened slightly against Rook's collar. Lena answered first. Not in combat. He should never go back to an environment with gunfire, blasts, rotor insertions, or forced confinement after activation. Pike nodded. But scent work is different. Search and rescue. Controlled conditions. Ground approach. No crowding. No yelling. With the right handler, maybe. Maybe does not help me, Grant said. Before anyone could respond, a phone rang in the operations office. A petty officer picked it up. He listened for 10 seconds. His expression changed. Sir, he said, turning toward Grant, San Diego County Emergency Management is requesting support. Mudslide east of Pine Valley. Father and daughter missing since last night. Local teams lost the trail near Blackwater Ridge. Weather is making air support unreliable. Grant closed his eyes for half a second. Rook had already lifted his head. The room went quiet. Pike looked from the dog to Caleb. He heard the word missing. Rook stood. No trembling. No growling. His ears came forward. His body aligned itself toward the doorway as if some old switch had been thrown inside him. Lena spoke carefully. If we send him, it has to be clean. No helicopter insertion. No crowding. Caleb handles him. Pike supervises. I go as behavioral support. Grant stared at her. This animal attacked a trainer yesterday. Caleb's voice stayed calm. Yesterday, everybody tried to force him to prove he was not broken. Today, Let him prove he still knows how to save someone. Nobody answered. Then Rook walked to the equipment rack and stopped beside a search harness. He lowered his nose to it, breathed once, and looked back at Caleb. Waiting. Pike let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I will be damned. Grant pointed at Caleb. One incident, and I pull him. Caleb clipped the harness onto Rook with hands that had steadied under worse circumstances. There will not be an incident. By 05:20, Blackwater Ridge was buried in fog. Search vehicles lined the muddy turnout below the trailhead. Red and amber lights pulsed against the rain. Pine branches sagged under the weight of the storm. Water ran across the access road in thin brown rivers. Somewhere below the ridge, a creek had become a violent channel carrying branches, rocks, and pieces of the trail downstream. Emily Harper was 7 years old. Her father, Daniel, had taken her hiking the previous afternoon when the first slide cut off the lower trail. By evening, rain had turned the hillside unstable. By midnight, county teams had located Daniel's backpack near a washed-out crossing, along with one of Emily's pink gloves snagged on a broken manzanita branch. After that, nothing. 2 local search dogs had worked the area before the second slide. Both lost the scent where floodwater had crossed the trail. The teams had kept looking through the night until the mountain became too dangerous to move across blindly. By dawn, everyone on the turnout looked wet, cold, exhausted, and afraid of the same unspoken thing. Caleb knelt in the mud beside a ranger, holding the small glove sealed inside an evidence bag. "This is hers," he asked. The ranger nodded. Her mother identified it. "We found it near the trail split." Caleb opened the bag and held the glove near Rook's nose. Rook inhaled once. His body changed immediately. Gone was the haunted dog from Coronado. Gone was the trembling. His head lowered. His tail leveled. His breathing slowed into focus. The world narrowed to scent, wind, water, mud, crushed leaves, cold air, and the fragile thread of a child somewhere in the mountain. "Find her," Caleb whispered. Rook surged uphill. Pike followed 10 yards behind with Lena and 2 county rescuers. Nobody spoke unless they had to. Caleb had given the rules before they left the base. No crowding, no shouting, no grabbing the dog unless he gave the order. Rook needed space to think. He needed the job to be the job, not another test designed by people afraid of him. The trail vanished after the first half-mile. Mudslides had carved raw brown scars into the hillside. Fallen cedars blocked old switchbacks. Fog rolled between the trunks so thick that the rescue lights became pale circles floating in the air. The rain had eased, but every branch still dripped. Every step released the smell of soaked earth. Rook did not. Slow. He worked like a creature built from purpose. At the first water crossing, he lost the scent where runoff had torn through the path. He circled without command, nose low, checking the edge of the flow, the broken grasses, the stones newly rolled from the bank. Then he turned sharply uphill and pulled Caleb toward a patch of exposed root. Pike watched in silence. This was not a broken animal. This was a veteran doing the work he had been born to do. Lena saw it too. She watched the way Caleb gave the dog nothing extra. No constant chatter. No pressure. No corrections born from human anxiety. He trusted Rook to solve what only Rook could solve, and Rook trusted him not to make the world smaller than it needed to be. At a narrow ledge above the creek, Rook stopped so abruptly Caleb nearly stepped into him. The dog lifted his head, ears high. Then he whined. Caleb raised a fist behind him. Everyone froze. At first, there was only water and wind moving through the pines. Then came a sound so faint Caleb almost missed it. A child crying. "Emily," Caleb called. The voice came back through the fog, thin and terrified. "Help." Rook pushed toward a gap in the rocks half hidden by fallen branches. Pike caught Caleb's shoulder. "That passage is unstable." Caleb looked at the mud wall, the fresh cracks, and the little stones still shifting under the runoff. "Then we move fast." He turned to Rook. "Easy lead." The dog went first, placing each paw with careful precision. Caleb followed, one hand against the rock, one hand on the line. The passage tightened, then opened into a small pocket beneath 2 leaning boulders. Emily Harper was curled against the stone, wrapped in a torn emergency blanket that must have come from her father's pack. Mud streaked her pink jacket. Her lips were pale. One shoe was missing, but her eyes opened when she saw Rook. "Doggy," she whispered. Rook approached her as if she were made of glass. He lowered himself beside her and rested his head against her knee. Emily began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the exhausted crying of a child who had spent all night trying to be brave and had finally been given permission to stop. Caleb crouched a few feet away. Emily, my name is Caleb. This is Rook. We are going to get you out. My dad fell, she said. Her voice shook so badly the words almost broke apart. The rocks moved. I could not see him. Caleb looked at the slope below the boulders. Fresh mud had split around a cedar root and poured downward toward the ravine. More rain was coming. The pocket would not hold forever. Did he answer you after the slide? Emily nodded weakly. At first. Then he stopped. Pike's voice crackled in Caleb's earpiece. Status. Child located, Caleb said. Alive. Cold. Conscious. Possible adult male downhill from her position. Need a medic moving to us now, but keep the team light. Ground is unstable. Rook suddenly stood. He moved to the edge of the pocket and sniffed hard toward the lower ravine. Caleb saw it immediately. Rook had found Emily. Now he had Daniel. Emily, Caleb said gently, unzipping his outer layer and wrapping it around her shoulders. I need you to stay with Chief Pike for 1 minute. Rook may have found your dad. The girl's hand shot out and gripped Rook's fur. Do not leave me. Rook turned back, pressed his nose into her palm, then looked at Caleb. Caleb understood. The dog was asking for permission to do both, comfort the child and keep working. Pike arrived with Lena and a medic, squeezing through the passage one at a time. Lena dropped to her knees beside Emily, wrapped her in a thermal blanket, and began speaking in a warm, steady voice. I have her, Lena said. Go. Caleb clipped a longer line to Rook's harness. Find him. Rook dropped along the muddy slope, nose working through wet leaves and broken stone. Caleb followed, sliding more than climbing. 10 yards below the pocket, Rook stopped beside a fallen cedar. A man's boot stuck out from behind it. Daniel Harper was pinned under a branch and half buried in mud, unconscious but breathing. Pike, Caleb shouted. Adult male located. Breathing. The medic scrambled down. Pike moved behind him. Caleb braced one hand against the cedar and looked up. The hillside gave a low groan. It was not loud, but every person on that slope heard it. Caleb saw the mud above them shiver. A sheet of earth was beginning to move. Everybody out, he yelled. The next 30 seconds became chaos. Pike and the medic worked Daniel's pinned leg free, while Caleb put his shoulder against the branch and pushed with everything he had. Lena lifted Emily and guided her back toward the passage, whispering to her the whole way. Rook stood between the child and the shifting slope, barking once every time the ground moved, warning them before each slide of mud and stone. Then the cedar branch snapped. Caleb dropped hard to one knee. Daniel slid 2 feet toward the ravine. Rook lunged forward and caught Daniel's jacket sleeve in his teeth. The dog planted all 4 paws into the mud and pulled with everything inside him. For one impossible second, the mountain pulled one way and the dog pulled the other. Caleb grabbed Daniel under the arms. Pike grabbed Caleb's vest. Together, they dragged the man onto firmer ground just as the slope behind them collapsed into the creek with a roar that swallowed every other sound. Emily screamed from the ledge above. Daniel's eyes opened. Emily, he gasped. She is alive, Caleb said. Rook found her. The man turned his head through the rain and saw the German shepherd standing over him. Mud streaked across his face. Daniel's torn sleeve still caught between his teeth. Daniel began to cry before he could speak. By the time they reached the trailhead, dawn had broken through the storm. Rescuers wrapped Emily and Daniel in blankets beside an ambulance. Emily would not let go of her father's hand. Daniel would not stop touching the top of her head, as if he needed to keep proving she was real. Rook stood several yards away, exhausted and covered in mud. Small cuts marked one ear. His paws were raw from rock and gravel. His coat was soaked through, but his eyes were calm. Pike walked up beside Caleb and looked at the dog. I owe him an apology, he said. Caleb rubbed Rook's neck. He does not need one. Lena joined them, medical bags slung over one shoulder. Maybe he does. Maybe a lot of veterans do. Nobody answered. A rescue helicopter circled far above the ridge, its sound softened by distance and fog. Rook heard it. Caleb felt his body tense. But this time, the dog did not drop to the ground. He did not bare his teeth at the sky. He looked up at Caleb instead. Caleb placed 2 fingers against Rook's collar. You are here, he whispered. Rook leaned into him. Commander Grant arrived at the trailhead as the ambulance doors closed. He had mud on his boots and the face of a man who knew the paperwork ahead would be ugly, but no longer as important as it had seemed before sunrise. Emily pressed her small hand against the ambulance window. Rook lifted his head and gave one soft bark. Emily smiled through the glass. Grant stood beside Caleb. County says both victims would have died before noon. Caleb looked at Rook. Then he did his job. Grant nodded slowly. The Navy will want to review what happens next. Pike stepped forward before Caleb could answer. With respect, sir, I know exactly what should happen next. Rook is retired from military working dog duty. No more combat evaluations. No more proving himself to people who do not understand what he survived. Lena added, he can still assist with controlled search and rescue work if Caleb chooses. But he needs a home first. Stability. One handler. No kenneling alone during storms. Grant looked at Caleb. And you? Caleb watched the ambulance pull away. For years, he had lived like a man who had come back by mistake. There had been hospitals, debriefings, signatures, gaps in records, sealed statements, and rooms where men in clean uniforms asked him to tell the worst night of his life in a way that would not embarrass anyone. After that, he had drifted. No unit. No home. No place on paper that felt true. Then Rook pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg. The answer became simple. I came here because I heard they were going to wash him out, Caleb said. I thought I was coming to save him. He looked down at the shepherd. But he saved a child today. Saved her father. And maybe he reminded me of something I forgot. Grant waited. Caleb swallowed. Some of us are not broken. We are just still carrying the place where we got hurt. For once, nobody tried to fill the silence. Rook lowered himself onto the wet earth near Caleb's boots and released a long, tired breath. The sunrise broke over Blackwater Ridge, turning the fog gold around him. Grant finally said, so what happens now? Caleb crouched and rested his forehead briefly against Rook's. The dog closed his eyes. Now, Caleb said, his voice rough but steady, he comes home. But coming home was not a single moment. It was not a signature on a release form or a quiet ride away from the base with a tired dog asleep in the back of a truck. It was not the applause from county rescuers who stepped aside as Rook passed, or the article that appeared 2 days later with the headline Hero Dog Finds Missing Child After Mudslide. Coming home was harder than being celebrated. Celebration faded by sunset. Trauma stayed awake. The first week after Blackwater Ridge, Caleb rented a small place near the edge of Julian, where pine trees crowded the road and the nights were cold enough to make the windows mist over. It was not much. 2 rooms, a sagging porch, a wood stove that coughed before it caught, and a strip of fenced land behind the cabin where Rook could move without feeling trapped. The first night, Rook refused to come inside. He stood on the porch with his ears forward and stared into the dark trees as if waiting for someone to give an order. Caleb opened the door and sat on the floor just inside the threshold. He did not call the dog. He did not command him. He simply sat where Rook could see him, back against the wall, one hand resting palm up on his knee. After 40 minutes, Rook stepped inside. After another 10, he lay down facing the door. At 2:13 in the morning, thunder rolled over the mountain. Rook woke with a snarl and slammed into the corner between the stove and the wall. His paws scraped the wood floor. His teeth flashed in the dark. For a moment, Caleb was back in another country under a collapsed roof, tasting dust and blood, hearing men shout through smoke, feeling the heat of fire crawl across broken concrete. He almost shouted. Instead, he breathed. Then he reached for the old canvas jacket hanging from the chair and slid it across the floor. You are here, Caleb said in the darkness. I am here. Nothing is falling. Rook stared at him, chest heaving. Thunder rolled again. The dog flinched, but he did not run. Caleb stayed on the floor until sunrise. By morning, Rook was asleep with his head on the sleeve of the jacket. That became the work. Not heroic work. Not the kind that made headlines. The private work. The ordinary, unglamorous work of teaching a nervous system that the war had ended. They walked at dawn when the world was quiet. They practiced scent games in the pines with strips of cloth hidden beneath rocks and fallen branches. Caleb let Rook choose paths, solve problems, stop when he needed to stop. Some days, the dog worked beautifully. Other days, a distant engine backfiring on the road made him flatten to the ground and shake for 20 minutes. On those days, Caleb did not call him broken. He sat beside him. Sometimes Pike drove up from Coronado with supplies and news he pretended not to care about. The trainer's shoulder is healing, Pike said one afternoon, leaning against the porch rail while Rook sniffed his boots and decided whether to forgive him. Good, Caleb said. He asked about the dog. Caleb looked up. Not like that, Pike added. He wanted to know if Rook was all right. Rook sneezed against Pike's boot and walked away. Pike nodded solemnly. I deserve that. Lena visited every other week. She brought medical supplies, behavioral notes, and an honesty that never asked Caleb to pretend he was doing better than he was. One evening, after Rook had fallen asleep near the stove, Lena sat across from Caleb at the small kitchen table and asked, Do you sleep? Caleb looked toward the dog. Enough. That is not an answer. It is the one I have. She did not push immediately. That was what made him answer more than he meant to. I thought coming back would feel like surviving, he said. Mostly it felt like being misplaced. Everyone had a version of the story they needed me to fit into. The mission failed. The handler died. The dog was recovered. The missing man stayed missing because it made the report cleaner. And you? Caleb traced a scar on the table with one finger. I was inconvenient. Rook lifted his head from across the room, as if he had heard the word beneath the word. Lena glanced at the dog. He knows when you go there. So do I. Do you come back? Caleb was quiet for a long time. More often now, he said. 2 months after Blackwater Ridge, the county called again. An elderly man with dementia had wandered from a rural care home before sunrise. No storm this time. No helicopters. No collapsed hillside. Just chaparral, dry creek beds, and a family standing in a parking lot with fear written across every face. Caleb said no at first. Then he looked at Rook. The dog was standing by the door. Not frantic. Not triggered. Waiting. You sure? Caleb asked him. Rook picked up his search harness in his mouth and brought it over. They found the man in 93 minutes, dehydrated and confused beneath an oak tree, trying to remember the name of a wife who had been gone for 12 years. Rook approached him slowly, rested his head on the man's knee, and let the old man hold on to his collar until the rescuers arrived. After that, the calls came carefully. Not too many. Not too loud. Not for every case. Caleb chose the ones that fit Rook's healing instead of someone else's desperation. Missing hikers. Lost children. Alzheimer's walkaways. A teenager who had run into the hills after a fight with his stepfather and was found at dusk, crying behind a boulder, with Rook sitting beside him like a guardian made of fur and old scars. People began to know them. Not as a military asset. Not as a dangerous dog. As Caleb and Rook. The man who had come back from a sealed file. The dog they had almost given up on. One spring morning, Emily Harper came to visit. She arrived with her father, carrying a paper bag and wearing 2 pink gloves even though the air was warm. Daniel looked stronger than he had at the trailhead, though he still walked with a slight limp. Emily ran halfway up the cabin path, then stopped when she saw Rook on the porch. She did not rush him. Caleb noticed that. Someone had taught her, or maybe fear had made her wise in the way children should not have to be. Hi, Rook, she said. Rook stood, sniffed the air, and walked down the steps. Emily held out the paper bag. I brought you something. Inside were homemade dog biscuits shaped like stars. Rook accepted one with great seriousness. Daniel cleared his throat. She insisted on making them herself. They are mostly peanut butter, Emily said, and only a little burnt. Caleb smiled. That sounds like the best kind. Emily looked at Rook's ear, where a small scar remained from the rocks. Does it still hurt? No, Caleb said. Not much. She nodded, considering this. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I made him a medal, she said. It was a child's drawing. Rook standing on a mountain, wearing a gold star around his neck. Beside him was a little girl with pink gloves. Above them, in uneven letters, she had written, Rook is not broken. He is brave. Caleb looked at the drawing for too long. Daniel saw his face and quietly looked away. Emily stepped closer. You can keep it. Caleb crouched so he was at her level. Thank you. I was scared in the rocks, she said. I know. But when Rook put his head on my knee, I thought maybe I was not alone anymore. Caleb's voice did not work right away. Rook leaned against the child gently, with the careful strength he used around frightened people. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck. For once, he let someone hold on. That night, Caleb pinned the drawing to the cabin wall above the small table. Rook stared at it for a while, then sneezed once and lay down. Critic, Caleb said. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Months turned into a year. The official papers took longer than the healing did, because systems built to classify things were rarely good at understanding them. There were reviews, hearings, medical notes, service records, redacted mission summaries, and questions asked in rooms where men tried to sound compassionate without admitting fault. Pike testified. Lena testified. So did the county rescue coordinator, Daniel Harper, and a trainer with a healed shoulder who stood in uniform and said, very quietly, that Rook had not attacked him out of malice. He had been afraid, and the trainer had been too proud to see it until he hit the concrete. When Caleb was called, he did not say much. He told them Rook had served until service became suffering. He told them loyalty did not expire when usefulness became complicated. He told them that if the Navy wanted to honor working dogs, it needed to understand that some wounds did not bleed and some recoveries could not be forced on a schedule. Then he stopped. Across the room, Rook lay beside his chair, calm beneath the fluorescent lights. One admiral looked down at the dog and asked, "And what would you call him now, Chief Mercer?" Caleb looked at Rook. The dog looked back. "Home," Caleb said. The room went still. 3 weeks later, Rook's retirement became official. There was a small ceremony at Coronado. Caleb nearly refused it, but Pike said the handlers needed to see it. Lena said Rook needed to walk onto that yard one more time and leave it under his own power, without fear deciding the ending for him. So they went. The day was clear. The concrete was dry. No red lights flashed. No sirens sounded. The kennel doors stood open. Handlers lined the yard in dress uniforms and work boots, trying not to look emotional and failing in different ways. Rook hesitated at the gate. Caleb felt it through the leash. "You do not have to," he said. Rook stood there, ears forward, breathing in the place that had once smelled like panic. Then he stepped through. No trembling, no growl, just one step, then another. Pike read the commendation. His voice stayed steady until the part about Blackwater Ridge. Lena stood with her arms folded, blinking more than necessary. The trainer Rook had knocked down stood near the front, and when the ceremony ended, he approached slowly and lowered one hand. Rook sniffed it. The man swallowed. "Sorry, boy." Rook looked at him for a long second. Then he licked the man's fingers once and turned back to Caleb, as if forgiveness was important, but lunch might be more urgent. The handlers laughed. The sound loosened something in the yard. Afterward, Pike handed Caleb a small wooden box. Inside was Rook's old service collar, cleaned and mounted beside a brass plate engraved with his name. Rook, military working dog loyal beyond command. Caleb ran his thumb over the words. "He earned more than that," Pike said. "Yes," Caleb answered. "But it is a start." That evening, back at the cabin, a storm rolled in from the west. The first thunder came just after dark. Rook lifted his head. Caleb looked over from the stove. For a moment, neither moved. Then Rook stood, walked to the hook by the door, took Caleb's old canvas jacket in his teeth, and carried it to the rug. He turned once, lay down on it, and released a long breath. Caleb sat beside him. Rain began to tap against the roof. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The windows trembled faintly in their frames. Rook's body tensed, then eased. Caleb rested a hand on his shoulder. "You are here," he said. Rook closed his eyes. For years, both of them had believed survival meant staying alert enough to outrun the past when it came for them. They had mistaken vigilance for strength. They had mistaken silence for control. They had mistaken being useful for being whole. But healing, Caleb was learning, did not always arrive like victory. Sometimes it arrived as a dog sleeping through thunder. Sometimes it arrived as a child's drawing pin to a wall. Sometimes it arrived as the courage to enter a place that had hurt you and leave without carrying all of it back out. The storm moved over the cabin and into the dark trees beyond. Rook slept. Caleb listened to his breathing. And for the first time and longer than he could remember, he did not count the seconds between thunder and memory. He only sat beside the dog who had saved him once in war, saved a child in the mountains, and then, in the slow, quiet work afterward, saved him in a way no report would ever know how to record. Outside, the world continued. Inside, Rook dreamed without running. And Caleb stayed.